Amara Johnson served champagne to millionaires at Charleston's most exclusive restaurant, never imagining her life was about to explode, when she noticed an intricate tattoo on a billionaire's palm, identical to the mysterious mark her mother had carried for 25 years and refused to explain. And before Amara could stop herself, she whispered the words that would change everything, telling Richard Davenport, the most powerful man in the city, that her mother had that exact same tattoo. She had no idea she'd just unlocked a conspiracy that had kept her existence hidden for decades, or that the wealthy family who'd spent 25 years burying the truth would stop at nothing to keep their secrets safe, because some truths aren't just dangerous, they're worth killing for, and Amara was about to discover she was one of them. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The evening rush at Crescent Hall always brought a certain electricity to the air. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across white tablecloths, and the soft murmur of conversation mixed with the gentle clink of silverware against fine china. Amara Johnson moved through the dining room with practiced grace, balancing a tray of champagne flutes as naturally as breathing. Her black uniform was crisp, her hair pulled back into a neat bun, and despite the ache in her feet from standing for 6 hours straight, she maintained the calm, professional smile that had made her a favorite among the regular patrons. At 25, Amara had learned to navigate the world of the wealthy with quiet dignity. She didn't resent the designer handbags that cost more than her monthly rent, or the casual way diners ordered $100 bottles of wine. This was simply the reality of her workplace, and she needed this job. More than that, she needed the tips that helped pay for her mother's medications and her own evening accounting classes at the community college. "Table 7 needs water," her co-worker Tasha whispered, as they passed each other near the kitchen doors. Tasha was the closest thing Amara had to a best friend at work, a lively woman with quick wit and an infectious laugh. "And Mr. Henderson just asked for you specifically. Says you're the only one who remembers he likes his steak Pittsburgh rare." Amara smiled genuinely this time. Small kindnesses from regular customers made the long shifts bearable. She refilled water glasses, took orders with attentive patience, and somehow made each patron feel like they were the only table in the room. It was a skill she'd honed over 3 years at Crescent Hall, and it had earned her respect from the staff and generous tips from the clientele. As the dinner service reached its peak, the restaurant manager, Stephen Williams, appeared at her elbow. His usually composed expression carried a hint of tension. "Amara, I need you on table 12 tonight." She glanced toward the private dining area, a secluded section reserved for the restaurant's most elite guests. "Is everything all right?" Richard Davenport just arrived with his business associates. Stephen adjusted his tie, a nervous habit. "He's one of our most important clients. Very particular, sometimes intimidating, but he tips extremely well. I'm putting you on his table because you have a calming presence." He requested someone professional and unobtrusive. Amara's stomach tightened slightly. She knew the name, of course. Everyone in Charleston knew Richard Davenport. The billionaire investor had made his fortune in real estate and venture capital, building an empire that stretched across the Southeast. His face occasionally appeared in business magazines, always stern and commanding. She'd served wealthy clients before, but never someone of his stature. "I'll take care of it," she said, smoothing down her apron. "Just be yourself," Stephen added. "Polite, attentive, but not chatty. He doesn't like unnecessary conversation." Amara approached table 12 with her serving tray tucked under her arm. The private dining area was separated from the main room by elegant glass partitions etched with Art Deco patterns. 3 men in expensive suits sat around the table, but her attention immediately went to the man at the head. Richard Davenport was in his late 50s, with thick silver hair swept back from a strong, angular face. His suit probably cost more than Amara made in 6 months, and he carried himself with the absolute confidence of someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room. "Good evening, gentlemen," Amara said warmly. "My name is Amara, and I'll be taking care of you this evening. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The two associates glanced up and offered polite smiles, but Davenport remained focused on his phone, his jaw tight as he listened to whoever was on the other end of the call. Amara stood patiently, not rushing him, her hands folded in front of her. "I don't care what the lawyers say." Davenport's voice was low but sharp. "Those documents were filed properly. If someone's claiming inheritance disputes, they're lying through their teeth. Find the originals and have them on my desk by morning." His associates exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them, a younger man with nervous energy, cleared his throat. "We'll have the Macallan 18, neat, 3 glasses." "Of course," Amara said. "I'll be right back with those." As she turned to leave, she heard Davenport continue his conversation. "Missing documents don't just vanish, Marcus. Someone's playing games with the estate records, and I want to know who." When she returned with the whiskey, the phone call had ended, but tension still radiated from Davenport like heat from a furnace. She placed each glass carefully, moving with quiet efficiency. The associates began discussing quarterly projections, their voices careful and measured as if afraid to disturb their boss's dark mood. Amara took their dinner orders and was about to leave when Davenport finally spoke directly to her. His voice had lost some of its edge. "The Dover sole. And tell the chef I want it prepared simply. No unnecessary garnishes." "Absolutely, sir." Amara made a note on her pad. As she wrote, Davenport reached for his whiskey glass, and his phone buzzed again on the table. He gestured dismissively toward it with his other hand. And that's when Amara saw it. The movement caused his shirt cuff to slide back, revealing his wrist and the edge of his palm. There, rendered in dark ink against his skin, was a tattoo unlike anything she'd expected to see on a man like him. It was intricate and beautiful, a compass star at the center with delicate vines spiraling outward in a pattern that seemed both geometric and organic. The design had an old-world quality to it, carefully crafted, clearly meaningful. It wasn't the kind of tattoo someone got on a whim. This was deliberate, permanent, significant. Amara's breath caught in her throat. The notepad nearly slipped from her fingers. She knew that tattoo. She had seen it every single day of her life, on her mother's left hand, in the exact same place, with the exact same pattern. The compass star, the intertwining vines, every detail identical. For 25 years, Amara had wondered about that mark on her mother's skin. As a child, she'd traced the lines with her small fingers, asking what it meant, where it came from. Her mother, Lorraine, had always deflected the questions with gentle but firm refusals. "It's from a long time ago, baby. From before you were born. Don't worry about it." As Amara grew older, she stopped asking, accepting it as one of those mysteries every family carries. But now, here it was again, on the hand of a billionaire stranger. "Miss," one of the associates was looking at her expectantly. "Did you get all that?" Amara blinked, realizing she'd been staring. "I'm sorry, could you repeat the last part?" Heat crept up her neck as she finished taking the order, but her mind was racing. The coincidence seemed impossible. Identical tattoos, same placement, same intricate design. What were the chances? Her heart hammered against her ribs as questions flooded her thoughts. Did her mother know this man? Was this some kind of family symbol? Why had Lorraine never mentioned it? Before she could stop herself, before rational thought could intervene, the words tumbled out. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but my mother has a tattoo just like yours." The effect was immediate and startling. Richard Davenport's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto hers with sudden, fierce intensity. The color seemed to drain slightly from his face. The casual conversation at the table died instantly. His two associates froze mid-sentence, glancing between their boss and the waitress with obvious confusion. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The sounds of the restaurant faded into background noise. Amara felt pinned by his gaze, unable to look away, suddenly aware she'd crossed some invisible boundary. Davenport's jaw worked as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. His hand, the one with the tattoo, slowly curled into a fist. Something flickered across his face, emotion too complex to name. Shock, recognition, fear, maybe even grief. Then abruptly, he stood. His chair scraped against the floor. "Excuse me," he said to his associates, his voice strained. "I need to make a call. Order without me." He walked away from the table with stiff mechanical movements, leaving his untouched whiskey and his bewildered business partners behind. Amara stood there, still holding her notepad, feeling like she'd just detonated a bomb without meaning to. "Is everything all right?" one of the associates asked her, his tone more curious than concerned. "I think so," Amara managed. "I'll have your meals out shortly." She retreated to the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she clipped the order to the wheel. Tasha appeared at her side immediately, eyes wide with curiosity. "Girl, what just happened out there?" Stephen said Davenport looked like he saw a ghost and practically ran out of his own dinner meeting. "I don't know," Amara whispered. "I really don't know." But she did know something. She knew that tattoo meant more than her mother had ever admitted. And somehow, impossibly, it connected her family to one of the wealthiest men in Charleston. The rest of her shift passed in a fog. Davenport never returned to his table. His associates ate quietly, paid the bill, and left without the usual lingering over coffee and dessert. Amara went through the motions of serving her other tables, smiling and chatting on autopilot, while her mind churned with questions. When her shift finally ended near midnight, she drove home to the small apartment she shared with her mother, in a modest neighborhood far from the glittering lights of downtown. The building was old but clean, and their third-floor unit had a window that overlooked a small park. It wasn't much, but it was home. Lorraine was asleep on the worn couch, the television playing softly. She'd been too tired lately, her heart condition making even simple tasks exhausting. Amara stood in the doorway watching her mother sleep, and for the first time, she really looked at the tattoo on Lorraine's left hand where it rested against the cushion. Even faded with age, the design was unmistakable. The compass star, the spiraling vines, identical to what she'd seen on Richard Davenport's hand. Amara moved quietly to her bedroom, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment Davenport had seen the recognition in her eyes. His reaction had been too visceral to be coincidence. He knew something. And tomorrow, somehow, she would find answers. The next morning, Amara waited until her mother was awake and sitting at their small kitchen table with her usual cup of weak tea. Lorraine was 52 but looked older, the years of hard work and health problems etched into her face. Still, she had kind eyes and a gentle smile that had always made Amara feel safe. "Mama," Amara said carefully, sitting down across from her. "I need to ask you something about your tattoo." Lorraine's hand instinctively moved to cover the mark, a defensive gesture Amara had seen countless times. "Baby, we've talked about this. It's not important." "What does it mean?" Amara pressed, her voice gentle but insistent. "Please, I need to know." Something in her tone must have conveyed the urgency, because Lorraine set down her teacup with shaking hands. Her face had gone pale, her breathing slightly labored. "Why are you asking about this now, after all these years?" "Because I saw someone else with the same tattoo last night, exactly the same. And when I mentioned it to him, he looked like I'd shot him." Lorraine's eyes widened, and for a moment, Amara thought her mother might faint. Who? Who did you see? A customer at the restaurant. Richard Davenport. The teacup slipped from Lorraine's fingers, shattering against the table. Tea spread across the surface in a dark puddle, but neither of them moved to clean it. Lorraine was staring at her daughter with an expression of pure terror mixed with something else. Something that looked like long-buried grief. "Promise me," Lorraine whispered, her voice breaking. "Promise me you'll never say that name again. Never mention this to anyone. Do you understand me?" "Never." "Mama, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Lorraine reached across the table and gripped Amara's hands with surprising strength. "It's from a life I left behind, baby. A life that nearly destroyed me. Please, promise me you'll leave it alone." Tears were streaming down her mother's face now, and Amara felt her own eyes burning. She nodded slowly, even though she knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. "Okay, Mama, okay, I promise." But later that afternoon, while Lorraine napped, Amara couldn't resist searching through her mother's things. She felt guilty doing it, invading her privacy, but the need to understand was overwhelming. In the bottom drawer of Lorraine's dresser, tucked inside an old Bible, she found a photograph. The picture was old, the colors faded to warm yellows and browns. It showed a young Lorraine, maybe 20 years old, beautiful and laughing. She stood beside a man whose face had been torn away, leaving only a ragged edge. But the man's hand was visible in the frame, resting on Lorraine's shoulder, and on his palm was the unmistakable compass star tattoo. Amara's hands trembled as she held the photograph. Someone had deliberately removed the man's face, but they'd left enough to tell a story. Her mother had known someone with this tattoo intimately enough to be photographed with him, and judging by the way young Lorraine smiled in the picture, it had been someone she cared about deeply. Over the next few days, Amara became obsessed. Between her shifts at the restaurant and her evening classes, she spent every spare moment researching. The public library became her second home, as she searched online databases for any mention of the compass vine tattoo design. Most searches led nowhere, but finally she found something. An archived newspaper article from 1985 mentioned the Davenport family estate in passing, describing a charity gala. In the photograph accompanying the article, several people displayed their hands, pressed against a dedication plaque. And there, clear as day, were multiple hands bearing the same compass star design. The caption read, "Members of the Davenport Private Trust display their family mark." Amara's heart pounded as she read further. The tattoo wasn't just decorative. It was a signature, a permanent seal used by members of an exclusive inheritance trust established by the Davenport family in the early 1980s. Only direct beneficiaries received the mark. It was their way of identifying true heirs in a time before modern DNA testing and digital records. Her mother had this tattoo, which meant, impossibly, that Lorraine had once been connected to the Davenport fortune in some official capacity. The revelation left Amara dizzy with questions. How had her mother, who'd worked as a housekeeper her entire adult life, been part of a billionaire's inheritance trust? And why had she been living in poverty if she was entitled to that family's wealth? 5 days after their first encounter, Richard Davenport returned to Crescent Hall. Amara saw him the moment he entered, her stomach dropping. Stephen intercepted her immediately. "He specifically requested you as his server," the manager said, his expression carefully neutral. "Whatever happened last time, he wants you back at his table." Amara smoothed her apron with damp palms and approached the private dining area. This time Davenport sat alone. No business associates, no phone calls, just him sitting very still, his hands folded on the white tablecloth. When he looked up at her approach, his expression was different from before. The shock was gone, replaced by something harder to read: curiosity mixed with what might have been sadness. "Good evening, sir," Amara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Just water, please." He paused, then added, "Your mother, does she still live in Charleston?" The question hung in the air between them. Amara felt her breath catch. He knew Charleston. He knew where to ask, which meant he knew, or had known, her mother. "Yes," she said carefully. "She does." Davenport nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. She had the unsettling feeling he was searching for something, comparing her features to some memory. "What's her name?" Amara hesitated. Her mother's terrified expression flashed through her mind. "Promise me you'll never say that name again." But standing here, facing this man who clearly held answers, she couldn't stay silent. "Lorraine Johnson." Something cracked in his carefully composed expression. He closed his eyes briefly, his jaw clenching. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "She's alive," he whispered, more to himself than to Amara. "After all these years, she's alive." "Do you know my mother?" Amara asked, abandoning any pretense of professional distance. "I did. A long time ago." His voice was rough. "They told me she was dead. They told me you were both dead." The words hit Amara like a physical blow. Both? He knew about her? Or thought he did? Before she could respond, Davenport reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. His hand, with its compass star tattoo, rested beside it. "If you ever wish to know the truth," he said quietly, "call me. But understand that once you open this door, everything changes. For all of us." He stood then, placed $500 bills on the table as a tip, and walked out of the restaurant without ordering anything. Amara stood frozen, staring at the business card and the money, her entire world tilting on its axis. That night she confronted her mother again. She didn't mean to be harsh, but the questions burst out of her like water from a broken dam. "Who is Richard Davenport to you? Why does he think we were dead? Why do you both have that tattoo?" Lorraine, sitting in her usual spot on the couch, seemed to age 10 years before Amara's eyes. Her breathing became labored, her hand clutching at her chest. "Baby, please. You don't understand what you're asking." "Then help me understand." Amara knelt beside her mother, taking her hands. "Please, Mama. I need to know the truth." Tears rolled down Lorraine's weathered cheeks. Her voice came out in broken whispers, each word seeming to cost her. "He doesn't know. He was told we both died. His family made sure of it. They said if I ever came back, if I ever told, they'd make sure you never had a chance at a real life. So I ran. I ran and I hid. And I raised you the best I could." "Who is he?" Amara pressed, though part of her already knew, had known since the moment she saw the tattoo. Lorraine looked at her daughter with infinite sadness. She spoke his name like a prayer and a curse combined. "Richard Davenport Sr., your father." The words seemed to echo in the small apartment. Amara felt the floor drop away beneath her. Her father. The billionaire was her father. All these years of struggle, of watching her mother work herself to exhaustion, of wearing second-hand clothes and eating rice and beans for dinner. And her father had been living in a mansion across town. "He didn't know," Lorraine repeated, seeing the anger flash across her daughter's face. "Baby, please believe me. He didn't know. If he had, he would have found us. I know he would have." But before Amara could respond, before she could process any of this impossible information, Lorraine's eyes rolled back. Her body went rigid, then slack. She collapsed against the couch, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Mama!" Amara grabbed her phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. "Stay with me, Mama. Please stay with me." As she waited for the ambulance, holding her unconscious mother, Amara's eyes fell on the business card she'd left on the coffee table. Richard Davenport's private number, printed in elegant script. The man who was her father, who had thought her dead, who had lived in luxury while they survived on the margins. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, and Amara held her mother tight, feeling her entire life fracturing into before and after this moment of terrible truth. After Lorraine collapsed and the truth about Richard Davenport being her father was revealed, Amara rode in the ambulance with her unconscious mother, watching the machines monitor every fragile heartbeat. The hospital admitted Lorraine immediately, and doctors explained that the stress had triggered a serious cardiac episode. She would need to stay for observation and treatment, possibly surgery, if her condition didn't stabilize. Amara sat in the sterile waiting room through the long night, her mind replaying everything her mother had confessed before losing consciousness. The words echoed endlessly. Your father. Richard Davenport Sr. He doesn't know. They told him we were dead. Each revelation felt like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit, leaving gaps she desperately needed to fill. As dawn broke through the hospital windows, exhaustion finally drove Amara to close her eyes. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself reaching for her mother's old leather purse, the one Lorraine had been clutching when the paramedics arrived. Amara hadn't meant to search through it, but her hands moved almost of their own accord, opening compartments and checking pockets. In the inner zippered section, her fingers brushed against something papery and worn. She pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age, the edges soft from years of handling. The address was written in elegant cursive, R.D., and below it, an address in the affluent part of Charleston that no longer existed, demolished decades ago for a shopping complex. Amara's hands trembled as she carefully unfolded the letter inside. The paper was thin, nearly transparent in places, and the ink had faded to a soft brown. But the words were still legible, written in her mother's younger, more hopeful handwriting. My dearest Richard, I'm writing this knowing I may never send it. By the time you read this, if you ever do, I'll be gone. Your father's men came to me yesterday. They made it clear that I have two choices: disappear completely, or watch our child suffer consequences I can't even bear to imagine. They said you'd be told we died in an accident. They said it's better this way, cleaner for everyone. But I need you to know, wherever I am, whatever happens, that I loved you. And I'm keeping our baby safe. The child's safety is all that matters now. Forgive me for vanishing. Forgive me for not being strong enough to fight them. Please live your life and be happy. That's all I want for you. Forever yours, Lorraine. Tears blurred Amara's vision as she read the letter twice, then 3 times. Her mother had been threatened, forced to flee, to live in hiding for 25 years. And Richard Davenport truly hadn't known. He'd been lied to, manipulated by his own family into believing the woman he loved and their unborn child were dead. The anger that had been building inside Amara shifted, redirecting itself away from the man who was her father and toward the people who had orchestrated this cruel deception. Who were these people? His father? Other family members? And were they still around, still capable of causing harm? A nurse approached and told Amara she could see her mother briefly. Lorraine was awake but weak, hooked up to monitors and an IV drip. Her eyes found Amara immediately, filling with tears and worry. Baby, I'm so sorry, Lorraine whispered, her voice barely audible. I never wanted you to know. I wanted to protect you from all of this. Amara took her mother's hand, careful of the IV line. I found your letter, Mama, the one you wrote to him. Lorraine closed her eyes, fresh tears sliding down her temples. I wrote it the night before I left Charleston. I never had the courage to send it. I was so afraid they'd track me through the mail, find us somehow. Tell me everything. Amara said gently. Please, I need to understand what happened. Over the next hour, between pauses when the pain or emotion became too much, Lorraine told her story. She'd been 19, working as a housekeeper at the Davenport estate, saving money to go to nursing school. Richard had been 28, recently returned from business school, being groomed to take over the family empire. They'd met by accident when Lorraine had been cleaning his private study, and he'd returned early from a meeting. He wasn't like the others, Lorraine said, her voice distant with memory. He saw me as a person, not just staff. We started talking, just little conversations at first. He'd ask about my day, my dreams. I knew it was dangerous, knew we were from different worlds, but I fell in love with him anyway. Their relationship had remained secret for months. Richard had wanted to tell his family, to make things official, but Lorraine had begged him to wait. She'd seen how the other wealthy families treated their staff, the disdain and casual cruelty. She'd known what the reaction would be. We got the tattoos together, Lorraine continued, glancing at the faded compass star on her hand. It was his idea. He said the Davenports had this tradition, marking the people who were part of the inheritance trust. He wanted me to have it, wanted me to officially be part of his life, his future. We went to a private artist who did work for the family. Richard told him I was to be added to the trust registry. But when Lorraine became pregnant, everything unraveled. Richard's father, Richard Davenport Sr., discovered the relationship. The confrontation had been explosive. The elder Davenport had called Lorraine every vile name imaginable, accused her of seducing his son for money, of trying to trap their family. He'd threatened to have her arrested on false charges, to destroy her family, to make sure she never worked anywhere in South Carolina again. He gave me 24 hours to disappear, Lorraine said, her voice breaking. He had these men, security people, and they followed me everywhere that last day. One of them told me exactly what would happen to my baby if I didn't cooperate, so I ran. I took the little money I had saved, and I ran. She'd gone to Atlanta first, then Mobile, finally settling in a small town outside Charleston, where she could be close but invisible. She'd changed her last name, worked under the table when Amara was a baby, always looking over her shoulder. By the time she felt safe enough to come back to Charleston proper, years had passed. She'd heard Richard had gotten married, that he'd built his empire even larger. She convinced herself that he'd moved on, that bringing up the past would only cause more pain. I should have told you, Lorraine whispered. When you were old enough to understand, I should have explained. But I was so afraid. Afraid his family would find out you existed. Afraid of what they might do. Amara squeezed her mother's hand. You did what you had to do to keep me safe, Mama. I understand that now. A decision crystallized in her mind as she sat beside her mother's hospital bed. She couldn't undo the past, couldn't give her mother back the years stolen from her, but she could uncover the complete truth, and she could make sure the people responsible for this cruelty faced consequences. Before leaving the hospital that afternoon, Amara stopped in the restroom and carefully collected a DNA sample from her mother's cheek using a cotton swab from her purse. She knew it wasn't the most scientific method, but she needed proof, something concrete and irrefutable. She'd seen advertisements for DNA ancestry services, and she knew some of them had databases that could match family connections. More importantly, she'd read that the Davenport family's genealogy was partially public record, documented in historical societies and estate registrations due to their prominence. If she could get her DNA compared against those records, she'd have the evidence she needed. She mailed the sample that evening to a testing service that promised results within 3 weeks. 3 weeks of waiting, of not knowing for certain, of living in the space between suspicion and proof. Meanwhile, across town in his sprawling mansion, Richard Davenport sat alone in his study. the same room where he'd first met Lorraine decades ago. The space had been remodeled since then, modernized with technology and expensive art, but sometimes late at night, he could still see her there, laughing at something he'd said, her eyes bright with intelligence and kindness. He stared at the compass star tattoo on his palm, remembering the day they'd gotten the matching marks. He'd been so certain then, so sure that love could overcome the barriers of class and family expectation. He'd planned to announce their engagement, to face down his father's objections with the confidence of youth and privilege. Then she'd vanished. And his father had told him, with what seemed like genuine sorrow, that Lorraine and their unborn child had died in a car accident while she was fleeing the city. Devastated, he'd demanded to see the police report, the death certificates. His father had provided them, official-looking documents that Richard had no reason to question. He'd been 29 and shattered, barely able to function through the grief. His father had pushed him into marriage with Evelyn within a year, calling it a stabilizing influence. The union had been strategic, combining two powerful families, and Richard had gone through with it like a man in a fog. He'd built his empire, had a son, played the role expected of him. But he'd never loved Evelyn, and she'd known it. Their marriage was a business arrangement that both parties tolerated rather than celebrated. Now learning that Lorraine had been alive all these years, that his father had lied to him, that he had a daughter he'd never known, Richard felt a rage so profound it scared him. His father had died 5 years ago, taking the truth to his grave, beyond the reach of Richard's anger or justice. But others had known. His father couldn't have orchestrated the deception alone. Someone had forged those documents, arranged for Lorraine's disappearance, maintained the lie for decades. And Richard intended to find out who. He called his most trusted lawyer, Harold Langston, a man who'd worked for the family for 40 years and had always been honest with Richard, even when the truth was uncomfortable. When Harold arrived at the mansion an hour later, Richard poured them both a drink and asked the question that had been burning inside him. "Did you know my father lied about Lorraine?" Harold's weathered face went pale. He set down his untouched whiskey and nodded slowly. "I suspected. When your father ordered me to file certain papers and then later ordered them sealed, I had questions. But Richard, you have to understand. I was a young associate then. Your father was one of the most powerful men in the state. I had a family to support, a career that would have been destroyed if I'd crossed him." "What papers?" Richard demanded. "What did he make you seal?" "Her trust registration. When you had Lorraine marked with the family tattoo, you officially brought her into the inheritance structure. That meant she had legal rights to a portion of the estate. Your father couldn't have that. So he had me file documents declaring her dead and removing her from all registries. I didn't know she was actually alive until years later, and by then, the damage was done." Richard felt sick. "So she does have legal claim to the estate, even now?" "Potentially, yes. And if she had a child with you, that child would as well. The tattoo wasn't just symbolic, Richard. It was a legal seal, witnessed and registered. Your father understood that, which is why he worked so hard to erase all evidence of her existence." The implications staggered Richard. His daughter Amara had legitimate claim to a significant portion of his fortune. More than that, she deserved it. She and Lorraine both deserved restitution for the years stolen from them. The next evening, Richard sent his driver to the hospital with an enormous arrangement of white roses and a card. The message was simple. For what I didn't know, for what I should have found, for everything lost. Richard. When Amara arrived at the hospital after her shift, she found the flowers filling half of her mother's room. Lorraine was sitting up, looking stronger than she had in days, holding the card and crying quietly. He remembered. Lorraine whispered, "White roses were always my favorite. I told him once, years ago." And he remembered. Amara felt a complex tangle of emotions. Part of her wanted to stay angry at Richard Davenport, to hold him responsible for their years of struggle. But another part, the part that had read her mother's letter and seen genuine shock on his face at the restaurant, recognized that he too was a victim of his family's machinations. Back at Crescent Hall, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Somehow, word had gotten out that the billionaire Richard Davenport had taken a special interest in one of their waitresses. The rumors ranged from the plausible to the absurd. Some whispered about a possible promotion or business opportunity. Others suggested a romantic entanglement. A few, perhaps sensing something deeper, speculated about hidden family connections. Tasha cornered Amara in the break room, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Girl, you have to tell me what's going on. Stephen said Davenport asked about you specifically 3 times this week. The man sent flowers to someone, and the whole staff is buzzing. Is he trying to hire you away? Because if he is, you better negotiate hard." Amara forced a laugh. "It's nothing that exciting, I promise. Just a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. But it wasn't nothing. And the situation was about to become much more complicated. 3 weeks after she'd sent in the DNA sample, a thick envelope arrived at her apartment. Her hands shook as she opened it, scanning the technical language and genetic markers until she found the conclusion she'd been both hoping for and dreading. The test confirmed a 99.8% probability of a parent-child relationship between her DNA and the genetic profile associated, with Richard Davenport Sr. in the public genealogy database. She was his daughter. The man who'd thought her dead for 25 years was definitively, scientifically, her father. Amara sat on her bed, the paper trembling in her hands, and let herself cry. She cried for the childhood she'd never had, for the father who'd missed her first words and first steps. She cried for her mother, forced to raise a child alone under the constant shadow of fear. She cried for Richard, too, robbed of knowing his daughter, manipulated by the people he should have been able to trust. When the tears finally stopped, a cold determination settled over her. Her mother had been forced to hide, to run, to accept injustice because she had no power and no proof. But Amara had proof now, and she wasn't going to let the Davenport family ignore this truth or sweep it under the rug like they had everything else. She called the number on Richard's business card. He answered on the second ring, his voice tense. "This is Davenport. It's Amara Johnson. I need to meet with you." There was a pause, then, "When?" "Tomorrow night, at Crescent Hall, during the private dinner service. 9 o'clock. "I'll be there." Amara hung up and stared at the DNA report. Tomorrow night she would confront the man who was her father, and she would demand answers, acknowledgement, and justice for what had been stolen from her family. The next evening, Amara dressed in her uniform with deliberate care. She styled her hair, applied light makeup, and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like a waitress, a young woman serving the wealthy elite. But tonight, she was going to be something else entirely. Tonight, she was going to claim her truth. Stephen approached her as she arrived for her shift, his expression concerned. "Amara, Mr. Davenport specifically requested a private dining room and asked for you to be his sole server for the evening. He's bringing business associates, apparently important guests. Can you handle that?" "I can handle it," she said with more confidence than she felt. At exactly 9 o'clock, Richard Davenport arrived with 2 men in expensive suits, associates she recognized from his previous visits. Stephen escorted them to the most exclusive private room, separated from the rest of the restaurant by heavy oak doors and soundproofed walls. Amara entered carrying a tray with water glasses, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The DNA report was folded in her apron pocket, a hard edge pressing against her hip. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice steady. "Can I start you with drinks?" The associates ordered cocktails, but Richard simply asked for water. He watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, as if he was trying to memorize every feature of her face, cataloging the ways she resembled him or Lorraine. Amara poured their drinks, set out bread and olive oil, went through all the standard motions of service. The men discussed business matters, quarterly reports, investment opportunities, their voices filling the room with meaningless chatter. All the while, she could feel Richard's attention on her, waiting. Finally, when she approached to pour wine for the second course, Amara made her move. As she filled Richard's glass, she quietly pulled the DNA report from her apron and placed it on the table beside his plate. The official letterhead was visible, and the words parent-child relationship were highlighted. "You missed one inheritance, Mr. Davenport," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough to reach him. Richard's face drained of all color. His hand, reaching for his wine glass, froze in midair. The conversations at the table died instantly as both associates noticed the shift in atmosphere. Richard picked up the paper with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the document. She watched as he read the technical data, the genetic markers, the conclusion. When he looked up at her again, his eyes were filled with tears he was struggling to contain. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice rough, "I need you to leave. Now. We'll reschedule this meeting." "Richard, we flew in specifically for this dinner," one of the associates protested. "I said leave." The command in his voice left no room for argument. Both men stood, exchanging confused glances, and exited quickly. When the door closed behind them, Richard and Amara were alone in the elegant dining room. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 25 years of absence and pain. "That can't be possible," Richard finally said, though his voice suggested he knew it was. "The tests. They can be wrong. 99.8% probability," Amara replied. "According to every genetic standard, you're my father." Richard stood slowly, the paper still clutched in his hand, and for a moment she thought he might embrace her. Instead, he turned away, his shoulders shaking. "My God. All these years you were alive, and I didn't know. I should have looked harder. I should have questioned the reports. I should have found you. Your family made sure you wouldn't," Amara said, anger creeping into her voice despite her intention to stay calm. "They threatened my mother. They forced her to disappear. They lied to you and sealed the records so no one would ever know the truth." Richard turned back to her, and she saw genuine anguish on his face. "My father did this. I know he did. And I can't even confront him because he's been dead for 5 years. He took this secret to his grave, and he robbed me of knowing my own daughter." He moved closer, his voice dropping to an agonized whisper. "If I'd known, I would have moved heaven and earth to find you. I would have fought anyone, sacrificed anything. You have to believe that." "Do I?" Amara challenged. "Because from where I stood, you lived in a mansion while my mother worked 3 jobs. You drove luxury cars while we took the bus. You had everything while we had nothing. So forgive me if I'm having trouble believing you would have sacrificed anything." The words hit him like physical blows. He stepped back, his face contorted with pain. "You're right. You're absolutely right to be angry. I had a kingdom while you had eviction notices. I had a kingdom built on lies." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather-bound checkbook. "I know money can't fix this, can't give you back what was taken. But please, let me provide for you and your mother now. Whatever you need. Medical care, housing, education, anything." Amara felt her anger flare white-hot. "You think this is about money? You think a check makes everything okay? My mother lived in fear for 25 years. She sacrificed her dreams, her health, her happiness to keep me safe from your family. And you want to fix that with money? Then what do you want? Richard demanded, his own frustration breaking through. Tell me what I can do to make this right, because I don't know. I don't know how to fix 25 years of lies and loss. I want you to acknowledge me, Amara said, her voice breaking. Not in private, not in secret. I want the world to know that I'm your daughter. I want the Davenport family to admit what they did to my mother. I want justice. Before Richard could respond, the door to the private dining room burst open. One of Davenport's associates stood there, his phone in hand, his expression apologetic but urgent. Richard, I'm sorry, but there's been a leak. The press somehow got hold of information about a DNA test. They're calling it the Billionaire's secret daughter. It's already hitting social media. Richard's face went from anguish to furious in an instant. Who leaked it? How did they get that information? The associate shook his head helplessly. I don't know, but it's spreading fast. You need to get ahead of this, make a statement. Amara felt the blood drain from her face. She'd wanted acknowledgement, but not like this. Not as a scandal. Not as gossip for people to consume and judge. She looked at Richard and saw the same shock mirrored on his face. Outside the restaurant, they could hear commotion, raised voices, the flash of camera lights visible through the windows. The paparazzi had arrived, drawn by the scent of a story that would dominate headlines for weeks. Richard moved to the window and pulled back the curtain slightly. At least a dozen photographers crowded the entrance, with more arriving every minute. He let the curtain fall and turned to Amara, his expression grim. I'm so sorry. You deserved better than this. You deserved a choice in how this came out. Stephen appeared in the doorway, his face pale with stress. Mr. Davenport, Amara, there's a mob outside. They're asking for statements, taking photos of everyone coming in and out. I've called security, but this is beyond our capacity, and I'm sorry, Amara. But the owners asked me to tell you that you're suspended pending investigation. They don't want the restaurant associated with this scandal. The words hit Amara like a slap. Suspended. After 3 years of loyal service, after every double shift and skipped break and patient smile, they were throwing her aside because she'd become inconvenient. Richard's voice cut through the room like ice. Tell your owners that if they fire her, I'll make sure every business publication in the country knows how Crescent Hall treats its employees. And I'll personally ensure that every one of my associates boycotts this establishment. Stephen swallowed hard and nodded. I'll relay that message. After he left, Richard turned to Amara. I'm calling my lawyer and my security team. They'll get you out of here safely, through the back entrance. Go home, lock your doors, and don't talk to any reporters. Not yet. We need to control this narrative before it controls us. Us, Amara repeated, the word feeling strange on her tongue. Yes, us, Richard said firmly. Like it or not, we're in this together now, and I promise you, I will not let my family hurt you the way they hurt your mother. Not again. Never again. As his security team arrived to escort her out, Amara caught one last glimpse of Richard standing in the dining room, the DNA report still in his hand, his expression a mixture of determination and grief. Tomorrow, the whole world would know his secret. Tomorrow, everything would change for both of them. But tonight, in this moment, Amara felt something shift inside her. She'd wanted acknowledgement, wanted to force the truth into the light. Now she had it, and the consequences were just beginning to unfold. The scandal that had erupted at Crescent Hall spread like wildfire through every media outlet in Charleston and beyond. By the next morning, Amara's face was plastered across tabloid websites and social media platforms. Headlines screamed variations of the same sensational story. Billionaire's secret daughter emerges after 25 years. DNA evidence links Waitress to Davenport fortune. Hidden heir or gold digger? The truth behind Richard Davenport's shocking revelation. Amara sat in her small apartment, curtains drawn against the photographers camped outside her building, scrolling through her phone with growing horror. Someone had dug up her high school yearbook photo. Others had found pictures of her mother from decades ago. The comment sections were vicious, filled with strangers who felt entitled to judge her life, her motives, her worth. "She's obviously after his money," one comment read, with hundreds of likes. "Convenient timing that she shows up with a DNA test right when he's at his wealthiest." "Gold Digger 1001, another proclaimed. "Find a rich old man, claim to be his long-lost daughter, profit." The cruelty was overwhelming, but what hurt more were the articles questioning her mother's character, calling Lorraine everything from a scheming seductress to a liar who'd hidden a child to extort money years later. None of them knew the truth. None of them cared about the decades of fear and sacrifice. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from unknown numbers, reporters trying to get quotes, opportunists offering to manage her story for a fee. Amara stopped answering entirely. The hospital had called earlier to say that reporters were trying to get into Lorraine's room, and security had been forced to post guards outside the door. Meanwhile, across town in the Davenport mansion, Richard faced his own reckoning. His legal team had assembled in the study, a dozen attorneys in expensive suits reviewing documents and discussing damage control strategies. But it was the argument happening in the adjacent sitting room that truly concerned him. His son, Graham Davenport, stood with his arms crossed, his face twisted with contempt. At 30 years old, Graham had his father's height and his mother's cold beauty, but none of Richard's measured patience. He'd spent his entire life as the heir apparent, groomed to take over the empire, and he wasn't about to let some stranger threaten his inheritance. "This is absurd," Graham spat. "Some waitress shows up with a convenient DNA test, and we're supposed to just accept it. She's obviously a con artist who saw an opportunity." "The DNA doesn't lie," Richard said quietly. "I've had our own labs verify the results independently. She's my daughter." "Your alleged daughter," Graham's mother, Evelyn, interjected smoothly. She sat in an antique chair, perfectly composed despite the chaos, her blonde hair styled immaculately. "DNA tests can be falsified. People have been scamming wealthy families for centuries with false paternity claims." Richard felt his temper rising. "I knew her mother, Evelyn. I loved her mother, and my father lied to me about their deaths. Harold confirmed it yesterday. The records were sealed, the trust documents forged. This isn't a scam. This is my father's sins coming to light." "So what?" Graham demanded. "Even if it's true, even if she is biologically yours, that doesn't mean she deserves anything. She wasn't raised as a Davenport. She doesn't know our world, our responsibilities. Giving her access to the family fortune would be reckless." "She's my daughter," Richard repeated, his voice hardening. "And she and her mother were robbed of everything they should have had. I intend to make that right." Graham laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're going to destroy everything we've built because of some misplaced guilt. The board won't stand for it. The family won't stand for it. I won't stand for it. Then you'll have to fight me," Richard said coldly, "because I've made my decision." Evelyn stood gracefully, placing a calming hand on her son's arm. "Richard, let's not be hasty. Why don't we meet with the girl, hear her side of the story? Perhaps we can come to an arrangement that satisfies everyone without tearing the family apart." Richard studied his wife carefully. In 30 years of marriage, he'd learned to read her expressions, to hear what she wasn't saying. Evelyn never did anything without calculation. If she wanted to meet Amara, it was because she had a plan. "Fine," he agreed. "I'll arrange it." That afternoon, Harold Langston arrived at Amara's apartment building, pushing through the crowd of reporters with the authority of someone who'd spent decades dealing with media circuses. He knocked on her door and identified himself through the peephole. Amara let him in cautiously. The lawyer was in his 70s with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded her of her grandfather. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with deliberate care. Miss Johnson, I'm Harold Langston, Richard Davenport's attorney, he said once inside. I've been with the family for 40 years, and I need you to understand something important. You deserve more than silence. There's documentation that proves your mother was written into the Davenport Trust, then systematically erased from all records. He opened his briefcase and pulled out copies of old documents, yellowed with age. These are the original trust registrations from when you were conceived. Your mother's name is here, along with the witness signatures confirming her tattoo ceremony. Richard's father ordered these sealed after he forced her to disappear. Legally, you have standing to claim what should have been yours all along. Amara studied the papers, her heart pounding. What does that mean exactly? It means that the trust fund established for beneficiaries with the compass star mark should have included provisions for you. Depending on how the courts interpret the original documents, you could be entitled to a substantial portion of the estate. Millions, possibly more. The number made Amara dizzy. I don't want to take anything from anyone. I just wanted the truth acknowledged. Harold's expression softened. I believe you. But others won't see it that way. Richard's legitimate family will fight this. They'll claim you're after money, that your mother was a liar, that the DNA is fabricated. You need to be prepared for a battle, Miss Johnson, and you need to decide if you're strong enough to fight it. Before Amara could respond, her phone rang. It was the hospital. Her mother's heart condition had worsened with the stress of the media attention. The doctors were recommending emergency surgery, but Lorraine was refusing, saying she couldn't afford it. Tell her I'll cover everything, Amara said immediately, though she had no idea how she'd manage it. Her savings were minimal, and she was currently suspended without pay. Harold overheard and made a note. I'll handle the hospital bills. Consider it an advance on what the estate owes your family. That evening, despite every instinct telling her to refuse, Amara agreed to meet Richard's family at the Davenport estate. Harold insisted on accompanying her, and Richard sent a private car to avoid the reporters. As they drove through the Oasis city, Amara watched the neighborhoods transform from modest to affluent, the houses growing larger and more impressive until they reached the gated community where the Davenports lived. The estate was massive, a sprawling mansion that looked like it belonged in a historical preservation society. Manicured lawns stretched in every direction, and the house itself was a masterpiece of classical architecture with white columns and tall windows that glowed with warm light. Guards checked their identification at the gate before waving them through. As the car pulled up to the main entrance, Amara felt her stomach twist with nerves. This was her father's world, a world she'd never been part of, never been welcome in. Richard met them at the door personally, his expression tense but determined. Thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy. Where's my mother's medical bills being sent? Amara asked immediately. I want to make sure they're handled. Already taken care of, Richard assured her. The hospital has instructions to send everything to my accounts. Your mother will get the best cardiac specialists in the state, and there will be no discussion of costs. Amara nodded, some of her tension easing. Whatever else Richard Davenport might be, he was keeping his word about providing for them. He led her and Harold through the mansion, past rooms filled with priceless art and antique furniture, to a private library lined with leather-bound books. Evelyn waited there, seated in a high-backed chair like a queen granting audience. She was even more striking in person than in photographs, with sharp cheekbones and calculating blue eyes. Miss Johnson, Evelyn said, her voice smooth and cold. Please sit down. Amara remained standing. I prefer not to. A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed Evelyn's face. Very well. Let me be direct then. This situation is unfortunate for everyone involved. My husband was deceived by his father, and you and your mother suffered as a result. I acknowledge that. However, the reality is that you were not raised as part of this family. You don't understand our world, our obligations, our legacy. Is there a point to this? Amara asked, her patience already thin. Evelyn stood, moving to a desk and retrieving a folder. I'm prepared to offer you $10 million, cash transferred to accounts of your choosing, along with a trust fund for your mother's medical care for the rest of her life. In exchange, you sign documents relinquishing any claim to the Davenport name or estate, and you make a public statement that the DNA test was misinterpreted, that you were mistaken about the relationship. The offer hung in the air, staggering in its audacity. $10 million to disappear, to deny the truth, to let the lie continue. You want me to say I'm not Richard's daughter? Amara said slowly. Even though the DNA proves I am. I want you to walk away with your dignity and your bank account intact, Evelyn replied. Or you can refuse, and I promise you, I will dedicate every resource at my disposal to destroying your credibility. I'll prove your mother was nothing but a gold-digging maid who seduced my husband's father for money. I'll paint you as a con artist who falsified DNA results. By the time I'm done, you won't be able to show your face in Charleston without people spitting at your feet. Richard stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Evelyn, that's enough. Is it? Evelyn turned on him, her composure cracking slightly. You want to throw away our family's reputation, our legacy, everything we've built together for some waitress you barely know? She's not your daughter in any way that matters, Richard. Graham is your son. Graham has been by your side, learning the business, preparing to lead. What has she done except show up with a piece of paper? My mother has a name, Amara said, her voice cutting through the argument. Lorraine Johnson. And she wasn't just some maid. She was a woman your husband loved enough to mark with his family's symbol. She was a woman who was threatened and terrorized by your father-in-law because she committed the crime of loving someone above her station. And I'm not some waitress. I'm a woman who's worked 3 times as hard as your son has ever had to, just to survive. So no, I won't take your money and disappear. I won't sell my mother's memory to you. Evelyn's expression hardened into something cruel. Then I'll erase it myself. You think you've seen scandal? You haven't begun to understand what I'm capable of. I knew your mother back then, Miss Johnson. She was my maid before she was Richard's lover. She took what was mine first, his attention, his time, his heart. I watched her parade around the estate like she belonged here, and I kept my silence. But I won't make that mistake again. The revelation stunned everyone in the room. Evelyn had known Lorraine personally, had watched the relationship develop, had harbored resentment for 3 decades. Richard's voice was barely above a whisper. You knew? All this time, you knew my father lied about their deaths, and you never said anything. Your father did what was necessary, Evelyn said coldly. He protected our family, our future. I supported that decision then, and I support it now. The door to the library burst open, and Graham strode in, his expression triumphant. Mother, father, we have a problem. Or rather, you have a problem. He held up his phone, showing a social media post. Seems someone leaked a story about how Miss Johnson has been harassing Dad for money, making threats, refusing to leave him alone. The post includes doctored photos and quotes from anonymous sources at Crescent Hall saying she's been obsessed with wealthy clients for years. Amara felt the blood drain from her face. That's not true. None of that is true. Doesn't matter, Graham said with a smirk. It's already going viral. Public opinion is turning against you. By morning, you'll be the villain in this story, not the victim. Richard moved toward his son, rage radiating from every muscle. You did this. You leaked those lies. I protected our family, Graham shot back, which is more than you're doing. You're letting this woman manipulate you with fake sentiment and convenient DNA tests. I'm making sure everyone sees her for what she really is. The argument erupted into chaos, voices rising as accusations flew. Amara stood frozen in the center of it, watching the Davenport family tear itself apart over her existence. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? Acknowledgement, justice, the truth exposed. But standing here, watching the hatred and dysfunction, she felt only exhaustion and sadness. Harold touched her elbow gently. "We should go. This isn't productive." As they turned to leave, Evelyn's voice cut through the noise. "If you walk out that door, Miss Johnson, you declare war on this family, and we will win. We always win." Amara paused, looking back at the woman who'd orchestrated so much pain. "You already lost, Mrs. Davenport. You lost the moment you let hate dictate your choices. You've spent 30 years married to a man who loved someone else, raising a son who's more concerned with money than family. You might have wealth and power, but you have nothing that actually matters." She walked out of the mansion with her head high, Harold beside her, leaving the arguing voices behind. But as they drove away from the estate, Amara knew Evelyn's threat wasn't empty. The real battle was just beginning, and the Davenports had resources she couldn't match. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Graham's leaked story was already the top trending topic on social media. The narrative had shifted overnight. She was no longer the hidden daughter, the victim of family conspiracy. Now she was the opportunist, the scam artist, the woman trying to steal a fortune that didn't belong to her. By the time she reached her apartment, her landlord was waiting with an eviction notice. "I'm sorry, Miss Johnson, but the other tenants are complaining about the media circus. I need you to vacate within 30 days. Amara took the notice with numb fingers, adding it to the growing pile of consequences from speaking her truth. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, past the remaining photographers who shouted questions she refused to answer, and locked herself inside. Her phone rang again. This time it was the hospital. Her mother had finally agreed to the surgery, but she wanted to see Amara first. Lorraine was scared, the nurse explained gently, and she kept asking for her daughter. Amara grabbed her keys and headed back out, pushing through the reporters without a word. Her mother needed her, and nothing else mattered. Not Graham's lies, not Evelyn's threats, not the crumbling ruins of her former life. As she drove to the hospital through the darkening city, Amara made a decision. She would fight, not for money, not for revenge, but for her mother's dignity, for the truth, and for every person who'd ever been told they didn't matter because of where they came from. The Davenports might have wealth and power, but Amara had something stronger. She had the truth, and she had nothing left to lose. At the hospital, security escorted her through a back entrance to avoid the media. Her mother's room was quiet, the monitors beeping steadily. Lorraine looked small and fragile against the white sheets, but her eyes brightened when Amara entered. "Baby girl," Lorraine whispered, "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." "No, Mama," Amara said, taking her mother's hand carefully. "None of this is your fault. You did what you had to do to keep me safe. I should have been stronger, should have fought them years ago." Tears slipped down Lorraine's cheeks. "Now they're trying to destroy you the same way they destroyed me." "They won't succeed," Amara said firmly, "because I'm not running. I'm not hiding. And I have something you didn't have back then." "What's that?" "Proof. Evidence. And a father who's finally learning the truth about what his family did." Amara squeezed her mother's hand gently. "Rest now, Mama. Save your strength for the surgery. When you wake up, we're going to face this together, and we're going to win." Lorraine smiled weakly. "When did you become so brave?" "I learned it from you," Amara said softly. "You survived 25 years of fear and struggle, and you never let them break you. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen." As her mother drifted into medicated sleep, Amara sat beside the bed and opened her phone. She scrolled through the hateful comments, the leaked lies, the character assassination. Then she opened a new message and began to type. If the Davenports wanted a war, she would give them one. But she would fight with truth, not lies. With dignity, not deception. And she would make sure that when the dust settled, everyone would know exactly what the Davenport family had done to an innocent woman and her child. Tomorrow she would call a press conference. Tomorrow she would tell her mother's story in her own words. Tomorrow the real battle would begin, but tonight she simply held her mother's hand and whispered promises into the quiet room, vows that she intended to keep no matter the cost. After Amara's decision to hold a press conference and her vow to fight the Davenport family with truth, the night passed in restless vigilance. She sat beside her mother's hospital bed, watching the monitors track each heartbeat, each breath, knowing that tomorrow Lorraine would undergo surgery that carried serious risks given her weakened condition. As dawn broke through the hospital windows, casting pale light across the sterile room, Lorraine stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing on Amara with the clarity that sometimes came before difficult procedures. "Baby, I need to tell you something," Lorraine whispered, her voice thin but urgent. "In case something happens during the surgery." "Nothing's going to happen, Mama," Amara protested, but Lorraine shook her head weakly. "Listen to me. The tattoo, it's not just about love or family registration. It's the key to what they stole from us." Lorraine's breathing became labored, and Amara leaned closer. "My family owned land back before I met Richard. My grandfather left it to me. When Richard and I fell in love, we combined our resources. That land became the foundation for his first hotel development. The profits were supposed to be shared, protected in the trust. But his father erased all evidence of my claim." "How do I prove any of this?" Amara asked urgently. "Look under the rosewood box," Lorraine murmured. "In my bedroom closet, bottom shelf. Everything you need is there. The deed, the original contracts, and the key. The tattoo opens the vault where the real records are kept. Promise me you'll find it. Promise me you'll take back what's ours." Before Amara could ask more questions, Lorraine's eyes fluttered closed, and the monitors began beeping frantically. Nurses rushed in, and Amara was ushered out as they prepared her mother for emergency surgery. The cardiac team had decided they couldn't wait any longer. Hours crawled by in the surgical waiting room. Amara tried to focus on her phone, preparing notes for the press conference she'd scheduled for that afternoon. But her mind kept returning to her mother's words. A rosewood box. A deed. A vault that required the tattoo to open. Around mid-morning, Richard arrived at the hospital. He looked exhausted, his usually impeccable suit rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed. He spotted Amara immediately and crossed the waiting room, ignoring the few other people who recognized him and whispered behind their hands. "How is she?" he asked quietly. "In surgery. They said it could take hours." Amara studied her father's face, seeing genuine worry there. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did." Richard sat down beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I failed her 25 years ago. I won't fail her again, or you. My lawyers are preparing a full statement about my father's actions, about the trust fraud, all of it. We'll release it alongside your press conference." "Graham won't like that," Amara said. Richard's expression hardened. "Graham doesn't get a vote anymore. This morning I filed papers to remove him from his position as executive vice president. He abused his access to company resources to leak false information about you. That's grounds for termination." "And Evelyn?" "Filed for divorce an hour ago." Richard's voice was flat, emotionless. 30 years of marriage, and it turns out we barely knew each other. She admitted this morning that she helped my father forge the death certificates. She knew Lorraine was alive all these years and never said a word. The admission hung between them, shocking in its cruelty. Amara felt a surge of anger so intense it made her hands shake. She helped fake their deaths. She helped steal my mother's life. Yes, and she'll face consequences for it. Harold is building a case for fraud, conspiracy, possibly criminal charges depending on what the investigators find. Richard looked at Amara directly, his eyes haunted. I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry that the people I trusted most were capable of such evil. Before Amara could respond, the waiting room doors burst open. Graham Davenport stormed in, flanked by 2 private security guards, his face twisted with rage. Behind him, a news crew with cameras pushed their way inside despite hospital staff trying to stop them. There he is, Graham shouted, pointing at Richard, the man who's destroying his own legacy for a stranger. Tell them, Dad. Tell them how you're throwing away everything our family built because some woman showed up with a fake DNA test. Richard stood slowly, positioning himself between Graham and Amara. The DNA test wasn't fake, Graham. She's my daughter, and you need to leave before security removes you. Security works for me, too, Graham sneered. Or did you forget I still have friends on the board? They're calling an emergency meeting this afternoon to vote on your removal as CEO. Mental instability, they're calling it. Compromised judgment. You're done, old man. The camera crew filmed everything, capturing the confrontation in high definition. Amara realized this was deliberate, another calculated move to control the narrative. Graham was staging a public scene to paint Richard as unstable, and herself as the cause of the family's destruction. You leaked this to the media, Richard said, his voice dangerously quiet. You brought cameras to a hospital where a woman is fighting for her life in surgery. What kind of man does that? The kind who protects what's his, Graham shot back. This empire is mine by right. I've worked for it, bled for it. She's nobody. Just some waitress with a convenient story and a mother who knew how to play the long game. Amara stood, her fear replaced by cold fury. My mother is in surgery right now because the stress of your family's lies literally broke her heart. She spent 25 years running and hiding because your grandfather threatened to destroy us. And you dare to stand here in this hospital and call her a liar. I call it like I see it, Graham said with a cruel smile. And what I see is a woman who got pregnant by a rich man and disappeared to make her kid more valuable. Classic long con. Wait until the target is at his wealthiest, then show up with a sob story and a DNA test. How much did you pay the lab to fake those results? Richard moved before anyone could stop him. He grabbed Graham by the collar, shoving him against the wall with surprising strength for a man in his late 50s. That's my daughter you're talking about. Your sister. And if you ever speak about her or Lorraine that way again, I will personally make sure you never see a cent of this family's money. Security guards rushed forward, but it was Richard who released Graham first, stepping back with his hands raised. His breathing was labored, his face flushed dangerously red. He pressed a hand to his chest, his expression twisting in pain. Dad, Graham said, uncertainty creeping into his voice for the first time. Richard stumbled, and Amara caught him as his knees buckled. Someone get help, she shouted. He's having a heart attack. The hospital erupted into controlled chaos. Medical staff appeared with a gurney, asking rapid-fire questions as they assessed Richard's condition. Graham stood frozen against the wall, the color draining from his face as he watched his father being rushed away. The news cameras captured everything, the drama unfolding in real time for viewers across the city. Amara started to follow the gurney, but a nurse stopped her gently. Are you family? I'm his daughter, Amara said firmly. It was the first time she'd claimed the relationship out loud to a stranger, and the words felt both foreign and absolutely right. The nurse nodded and led her through. As they wheeled Richard into an examination room, his hand reached out and caught Amara's wrist. His grip was weak, his breathing shallow, but his eyes were clear and focused. "The vault," he whispered, "behind my study portrait. Your mother knows. The tattoo is the key." Then his eyes rolled back and the monitors started screaming. Doctors swarmed around him, shouting medical terminology Amara couldn't follow. Someone ushered her out, and she found herself back in the hallway, shaking and disoriented. Two people she loved were now fighting for their lives in the same hospital, and the man responsible stood in the waiting room looking shocked by what his cruelty had caused. Graham approached slowly, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Is he going to die?" "I don't know," Amara said coldly. "But if he does, you'll have to live with knowing your greed put him here. I didn't mean for this to happen." Graham's voice was barely audible. "I just wanted to protect what was mine. It was never yours," Amara said. "None of it. You didn't build that empire. You were just born into it. And you've spent your whole life taking it for granted while people like my mother worked themselves to death just to survive." She walked away from him, found a quiet corner of the hospital, and called Harold Langston. The lawyer answered immediately, his voice tense with worry. He'd already heard about Richard's collapse through the news coverage. "I need to get into the Davenport estate," Amara told him. "Richard said something about a vault behind a portrait in his study, and my mother mentioned a rosewood box in her apartment. There's evidence we need, proof of the land ownership and the original trust documents." "I'll meet you at your mother's apartment first," Harold said. "Then we'll deal with the estate. But Amara, you should know that Graham filed an injunction this afternoon trying to freeze all of Richard's assets and prevent any changes to his will. The board is siding with Graham, at least for now. If Richard doesn't survive, fighting this legally will be incredibly difficult." "Then we better find that evidence," Amara said grimly. An hour later, after receiving updates that both Richard and Lorraine were stable but critical, Amara met Harold at her mother's apartment. The media had finally dispersed, moving to cover the dual medical emergencies at the hospital. The small apartment felt emptier than ever as they entered. In Lorraine's bedroom closet, on the bottom shelf behind a stack of old shoe boxes, Amara found the rosewood box. It was beautiful, carved with intricate patterns that matched the compass star design of the tattoo. Her hands trembled as she lifted it carefully. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age, were documents that made Amara's breath catch. A deed to 70 acres of waterfront property in Charleston, dated 1998, with Amara Johnson listed as the sole owner. A contract, signed by both Lorraine and Richard Davenport, agreeing to develop the property jointly, with profits split evenly. A trust document establishing Lorraine as a beneficiary of the Davenport estate, and a heavy brass key engraved with the Davenport family crest, the compass star design, worked into its handle. "This is extraordinary," Harold breathed, examining the papers with a professional eye. "This deed alone proves your mother owned the land that became Davenport's first major hotel development. If we can prove the profits weren't distributed as agreed, you have a legitimate claim to billions, not millions." "It's not about the money," Amara said quietly, though she was beginning to understand it had never really been about the money. It was about acknowledgement, dignity, justice for the years stolen from her mother. "I know," Harold said gently, "but money is how the courts measure restitution, and you deserve every penny." They drove to the Davenport estate next. Harold had keys and authorization as Richard's attorney, and the security guards, having heard about Richard's hospitalization, let them through without challenge. The mansion felt different in the afternoon light, less imposing and more empty, a monument to wealth that had been built on lies. In Richard's study, behind a massive oil portrait of his father, they found the vault. It was old-fashioned, installed decades ago, with a keyhole that matched the unusual design of the compass star. But there was something else, a biometric pad that required a handprint. The tattoo, Amara realized. It's not just symbolic, it's an actual key. She pressed her mother's apartment key into the lock, and it turned smoothly. But the vault wouldn't open without the handprint verification. They needed someone with the compass star tattoo to complete the unlock sequence. "We need Richard," Harold said, "or your mother. They're the only ones, with the mark, who we can trust." "They're both unconscious in the hospital," Amara pointed out. "We'll have to wait." But fate intervened in the form of Evelyn Davenport. She appeared in the study doorway, her usual composure shattered. She'd been crying, mascara streaked down her cheeks, and she looked a decade older than she had the day before. "He's going to die, isn't he?" Evelyn asked, her voice hollow. "Richard. The doctors said his heart is badly damaged. Even if he survives, he'll never be the same." "I don't know," Amara answered honestly. "They're doing everything they can." Evelyn's eyes fell on the open vault door, then on the documents in Harold's hands. Something shifted in her expression, resignation replacing calculation. "You found the proof, the land deed, everything Richard's father tried to bury." "You knew about this too?" Amara asked, though she wasn't surprised anymore. "Not at first, but over the years I pieced it together. Richard's father was many things, but subtle wasn't one of them. He kept records of his crimes like trophies." Evelyn moved to a bookshelf and pulled out a leather journal, its pages filled with handwritten notes. "This is his diary. Every lie he told, every document he forged, every threat he made. He wrote it all down, believed he was protecting the family legacy for posterity. It never occurred to him that it might be used as evidence against that very legacy." She handed the journal to Harold, who flipped through it with growing amazement. "This is a confession to fraud, conspiracy, possibly kidnapping. Mrs. Davenport, why are you giving this to us?" "Because I'm tired," Evelyn said simply. "Tired of the lies, tired of protecting monsters, tired of watching my husband love a ghost more than he ever loved me. If Richard survives, maybe he can finally have the life he wanted all those years ago. And if he doesn't," her voice broke, "then at least the truth will be told." She walked out of the study, leaving them with the evidence that would change everything. Amara watched her go, feeling an unexpected stab of pity for the woman who'd threatened her just days before. Evelyn Davenport had spent 30 years as the wife of a man who'd never truly been hers, and her bitterness had poisoned everything she touched. 2 days passed in a blur of hospital visits and legal preparations. Lorraine came through her surgery successfully, though her recovery would be long and difficult. Richard remained in intensive care, his condition slowly stabilizing, but still critical. Amara divided her time between their rooms, talking to her unconscious father about her mother, about the evidence they'd found, about the family he'd lost and might yet reclaim. On the third morning, Richard opened his eyes. Amara was there, reading aloud from Lorraine's letter, and his voice startled her. "She wrote that?" His words were slurred, weak, but unmistakably him. "Dad," Amara whispered, the words slipping out naturally now. "You're awake." "Barely." He tried to smile, but pain crossed his features. "Did you find it? The vault?" "We found everything. The deed, the contracts, your father's journal confessing to everything. Harold says we have enough to overturn all the fraud, to restore Mom's rights to the trust and the property profits." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "Good. That's good. I need you to do something for me. Anything. Take it all. The foundation, the properties, the trust. It should have been yours from the beginning. Graham can have the business operations, but the wealth, the legacy, that belongs to you and Lorraine. You don't have to decide this now," Amara protested. "Focus on getting better." "I need to do this while I still can." Richard said it calmly, resolutely. The doctors say my heart is badly damaged, so I'm going to use whatever time I have left to fix what my father broke. Over the next week, with Harold's help and Evelyn's surprising cooperation, Richard systematically transferred ownership of the Davenport Foundation and most of the family properties to Amara's name. Graham fought it legally, but the evidence was overwhelming. The deed proved Lorraine's ownership, the contracts proved the profit-sharing agreement, and the elder Davenport's journal proved the conspiracy to defraud. When Richard was finally strong enough to leave the hospital, he requested a press conference. The media gathered outside the hospital in droves, cameras ready to capture what everyone knew would be a historic moment. Richard stood at the podium, thinner and frailer than before, but with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. Amara stood beside him, and though she'd prepared no statement, he'd asked her to be there for this final public act. 25 years ago, Richard began, his voice amplified by microphones. The woman I loved disappeared with our unborn child. I was told they died in an accident. I grieved for them, built my empire over their grave, and lived half a life in their absence. But they weren't dead. They were driven into hiding by my father, who believed that love between a wealthy man and a working-class woman was a threat to our family's legacy. He paused, letting the words sink in. He was wrong. The only threat was the lie. And today, I'm here to tell the truth. This is my daughter, Amara Davenport. Her mother, Amara Johnson, is the bravest woman I've ever known, and together, they have shown me what real strength looks like. It's not wealth or power. It's surviving injustice and refusing to let it break you. It's standing up for the truth even when the whole world tries to silence you. Richard turned to Amara, taking her hand. This isn't revenge. It's restoration. For every voice silenced because of where they came from, for every person told they didn't deserve a seat at the table, this is proof that truth can't be erased forever. My daughter has inherited what should have been hers all along, and I couldn't be prouder. The press erupted with questions, but Richard simply smiled, waved, and walked back into the hospital with Amara supporting him. They went to Lorraine's room, where she sat propped up in bed, watching the press conference on television with tears streaming down her face. "Richard," Lorraine whispered as he entered. It was the first time they'd seen each other in 25 years. He crossed to her bedside and took her hand, the one with the faded compass star tattoo. "I'm so sorry, Lorraine, for everything you endured, for every year I wasn't there. I'm so sorry." "You didn't know," Lorraine said softly. "And now you do. That's what matters." They talked for hours, with Amara sometimes joining the conversation, and sometimes just watching these two people who'd loved each other across decades of separation finally getting to speak the words they'd held inside for so long. 3 months later, Amara stood in front of a building in downtown Charleston. The sign above the door read, Crescent Hall. But that was about to change. Using a portion of her inheritance, she'd bought the restaurant where everything had started, where she'd first seen the tattoo that changed her life. The renovation was complete. The interior had been updated while maintaining its elegant character. And above the main counter, in a place of honor, hung a framed photograph of her mother's hand, the compass star tattoo clearly visible, alongside the original deed to the property that had started the Davenport empire. Lorraine's, Amara had renamed it. Simple, direct, honoring the woman who'd sacrificed everything. Richard attended the grand opening, his health stabilized, though he tired easily. He smiled as he watched Amara welcome guests, as he saw the restaurant staff, many of them formerly low-wage workers, now earning fair salaries and benefits from the Davenport Foundation programs Amara had established. "You did it," he told her during a quiet moment. "You took something broken and made it beautiful." "We did it," Amara corrected, squeezing his hand. That evening, after the guests had left and the lights were dimmed, Amara stood in the restaurant holding the brass key from the rosewood box. She placed it in a display case beside her mother's photograph, a reminder of everything they'd fought for and won. She glanced at her own hand, where she'd recently gotten a tattoo. The compass star, matching her mother's and father's, a permanent reminder that some bonds couldn't be erased by time or lies or fear. She carried her parents' legacy now, both the wealth and the responsibility, and she intended to use it to make sure that truth and justice were more than just words. The story that had started with a chance encounter and a recognized tattoo had become something larger, a testament to the power of perseverance and the impossibility of keeping truth buried forever. And as Amara locked up the restaurant that bore her mother's name, she knew that every person who walked through those doors would see the compass star and understand its message. Truth can't be erased forever. Love transcends barriers of class and time, and sometimes justice comes not through vengeance but through the simple act of refusing to let the powerful write history alone. The compass star would guide her forward, just as it always had, pointing toward a future where everyone had a place at the table, where love mattered more than status, and where the truth, no matter how long buried, always found its way to light. Like and subscribe for more stories of courage, justice, and the power of truth that refuses to stay silent.